Since the beginning of human history, humans have done two things: sing and dance. We do this for just about everything: to worship, to express joy, sorrow, anger. Some cultures dance to intimidate for war. But all across humanity, song and dance is important. So, it should not come as to anyone's surprise that on a fine day in October of 1927, the very first talkie, the jazz singer, was a musical. Could you imagine that? Arriving in the theater, waiting for the tune-up of the orchestra or the winding of a gramophone. But instead, it's a packed theater and the recorded music is in perfect sync with the picture. This would start a long trend, slow to start at first. In the following year, only one musical was made, to a massive boom in 1929 with a whopping 12 musicals in production at the very start of the Great Depression. Now, many of these are what are called revue musicals, where there's a story and the musical numbers are separate from the story, usually set to a stage. Recording technology made movement in musicals incredibly difficult at first, until the practice of using the boom microphone, invented by Dorothy Arzner in 1929, became much more widely used. But as the technology matured, so did the musical to appear more lavish on set. In combination with new choreography techniques by Busby Berkeley, who led the dancing off the stage and into the set itself in the early days of the musical, this would lead to a bright, golden era of musicals, with brilliant producer Arthur Ford leading the charge away from the show musical, and towards the integrated musical we've come to know today. The Golden Age, also known as the Classical Sound Era, lasted from the 1930s to the late 1950s. This was in conjunction with the Golden Age of stage musicals, with Rodgers and Hammerstein changing the way the narrative structure worked. It benefited from the technologies that came in response to television, such as widescreen, which allowed for more lavish productions, and color allowed for more of that fantastic element to help audiences escape the realities that were life. Despite the aftereffects of World War II, the Great Depression and the war, and, with a little clever marketing, helped spur on the boom of the musical, featuring big talents such as Ginger Rogers, Fred Astaire, Bing Crosby, Esther Williams, Judy Garland, Eddie Cantor, Danny Kaye, and Ruby Keeler. While musicals and their stars maintained the box office attention, they were inconsistent and rushed, much like today's Transformers sequels. So, let's put this into perspective of what I meant. While The Wizard of Oz is widely considered one of the greatest films of all time, and at its release to critical acclaim in August of 1939, it didn't recoup its budget of $2.77 million until its theatrical re-release in 1949, and only just did it. It only recouped a loss with a total of $3 million worldwide. The Sound of Music in 1965, which would become the highest-grossing film in 1965 and beat out the highest-grossing film of all time, Gone with the Wind, with $286 million worldwide in 5 years and a budget of $8.2 million, the profits of which would make flops Hello Dolly in 1969, Dr. Dolittle in 1967, and Star. Fun fact: Dr. Dolittle was to start a new triumvirate of stage shows to match The Sound of Music, My Fair Lady, and Mary Poppins. It could not do it. Grease in 1978 and the Rocky Horror Picture Show in 1973 and the 70s would be the last in the line of live-action musicals to grow so high, with $350 million and $175 million respectively, making them at their respective times the highest-grossing musical film up until 2008's Mamma Mia. With the advent of pop music changing, the British invasion imminent, we see the sharp decline with a few high notes from the late 50s to the 80s. The main reason was music was not matching what was popular in the day. Films like Yesterday and A Hard Day's Night became the new norm, with studios becoming increasingly out of touch with the younger audiences they once captured. The exceptions to this were ones that adopted modern music, like the Rocky Horror Picture Show. But as budgets were thrown and the increasing dependence on the star system that was on the brink of breaking, more and more musical fell. The world was changing, and the musical was not. However, this would change with the Eisner-held Disney Studios era. With clever composers Al Silvestri and Alan Menken, they would recreate the feel of the integrated musical, with a new, yet old target: children. In 1989, an animated red-headed mermaid would grant new life to the film musical. The Little Mermaid would spark the love of musicals in the millennial generation, with every year following a new musical into the production until the end of the Eisner era in the late 90s. Spreading the gamut of the topics and cultures around the world, Disney's clever team would come out at a time where VHS would allow for sales far greater than initially obtained. My own personal memories of my sister and I burning through every Disney tape we ever got and having to buy more. But absence helps the art grow fonder, and while we grew to love musicals as a generation again, Disney's clever marketing of placing films in the vault would add to that hype. This would allow for a resurgence of the live-action musical, as Chicago in 2002 would grace the stage to critical acclaim, even winning and gaining Oscar attention. In 2004, we would see the remake of The Phantom of the Opera. And then, in 2005, the 1994 hit Broadway musical Rent would come to this movie star scene with star-studded and some original cast. Even Stephen Sondheim got the live-action treatment with Sweeney Todd, directed by Tim Burton in 2007. And then Into the Woods, and the subsequent live-action adaptations of all those 90s animated musicals coming out every other year till now. Of all the genres in film, the musical has always been present. It shifts and changes, adopting ideals of society and escaping some. Used as propaganda to support the war efforts, to now criticizing said efforts. It's been a roller coaster ride of 90 years, and I, for one, am excited to see the next step.